This video is for day two's homework. I have posted the solutions. It is due today, Wednesday, March 25th. Don't worry about any deadlines or anything like that. You'll get full credit for these as long as they're in within a reasonable amount of time. I have you asking questions on tomorrow's homework. I will post those solutions and go over those tomorrow. All right, so you asked for 34, 36, and 28 and 30. So let's go with 28 and 30 first. So 28, I've got the cotangent of x plus the sine of x over 1 plus the cosine. I could make this the cosine over the sine, get common denominator, add those together, which I did, and it didn't work. So you need to be willing to try something, erase it, or get another sheet of paper and try again. Next trick is multiply by the conjugate. So I'm going to multiply by 1 minus the cosine of x over 1 minus the cosine of x. Cotangent of x plus, this is going to be a distribution, so it's going to be sine of x minus sine of x cosine of x over, now I have to FOIL, so it's going to be 1, and since they're the conjugates, the inners and outers, which will be plus and minus cosine of x, add to 0, minus cosine squared x. Whenever I see a 1 and a cosine squared, I'm thinking Pythagorean identity. You have to have these memorized and be able to manipulate them around to what you need or want. So I'm just going to subtract the cosine of x squared from both sides. Sine squared x is equal to 1 minus cosine squared x. So I'm going to replace the denominator here with that. Cotangent x plus sine x minus sine x cosine x all over now just the sine squared of x. I now have two terms in the numerator with a monomial denominator. I'm going to break that into two fractions that added together to give me that. Sine x over sine squared x minus sine x cosine x all over that same sine squared x. Cotangent I am going to change into cosine x over sine x plus one of these sine x's will cancel out, leaving me 1 over the sine of x, minus, again, one of these cancels out, giving me cosine x over sine x. Three fractions, one denominator, cosine x plus 1 minus cosine x, all over the sine of x. Cosine minus the cosine adds to 0, so I'm left with 1 over sine of x. And that is the cosecant of x, which is exactly what we want it to be. All right, number 30, apparently I wrote down 31 on the solution, so you guys didn't see 30. This is 30, so it's going to be the same exact trick here. I got the 1 plus sine x, so I'm going to go ahead and multiply by the conjugate. And I'll kind of go through this one a little quicker. You're going to have 1 minus cosine squared x plus cosine squared x sine x over, multiplying those, 1 minus sine squared x. 1 minus cosine squared x plus cosine squared x sine x. And again, the Pythagorean identity, I'm now just going to subtract the cosine squared from both sides. I'm sorry, or the sine squared, give me cosine squared. So 1 minus sine squared of x is cosine squared x. Breaking this out, cosine squared x over cosine squared x plus cosine squared x sine x all over cosine squared x. 1 minus, now that's a 1, plus sine x, and distributing the negative over, 1 minus sine x. That should be a minus here. Because I needed to multiply by the conjugate way back there. Sorry about that. This is 1 minus sine x, 1 minus sine x. So it's a minus here, a minus here, minus here, minus here, making that a plus. They add to 0, so I get a sine x. 34. Yeah, what do you do? Where do you start? That is the hard part about these questions. You have to be willing just to try something. You can try many different things. Remember, always go to sines, cosines. That didn't work. I see a cosecant squared. Always think Pythagorean identities. I caught a cosecant. That's how I remember that identity. So I'm going to replace the cosecant squared with the 1 plus cotangent squared. And multiply that by the secant of x. So that gives me secant x plus the secant x cotangent x, or cotangent squared x. Well, I got the secant x, that's good. Now, I'm just going to play with this. The secant x plus secant x, well, let's change the secant to what it is. It is 1 over the cosine of x. And the cotangent is the cosine over the sine, or, in this case, the cosine squared of x over the sine squared of x. The cosine cancels out one of them here. Secant of x plus, what do we have left here? Cosine over sine squared. So I'm going to write that as 1 over one of the sines times the cosine over one of the sines. And again, you're seeing many different tricks that you can use, and that's the goal of this. You guys just started this stuff. Don't get discouraged. 1 over the sine is the cosecant of x. Cosine over sine is the cotangent of x. And that's where we wanted to be. Okay, 36 is quite challenging. You can see on my solutions that I tried a couple different things, and I actually didn't finish it. I didn't realize that. I started with the left side here, cross some things out. I went with then 1 over the sine of x minus 1 over the cosecant, or rather cosine of x. And the denominator is exactly the same, except it's a plus. And we're going to now get a common denominator in both numerator and denominator and add those together. So cosine x over cosine x and sine x over sine x. So in the numerator, I get cosine of x over cosine x sine x minus sine x over cosine x sine x. The denominator is going to be identical, except, again, for the plus. Cosine x over cosine x sine x plus sine x over cosine x sine x. Adding both numerators and denominator together, I'm going to get cosine x minus sine x all over cosine x sine x. And the denominator is going to look identical, except it's going to be cosine x plus sine x over cosine x sine x. And I tried a couple things at this point and ran into some walls. So one thing you can do, I said only work with one side. That's true. Your final answer can only be written with one side. I went ahead and took a look at the other side. And cotangent x minus 1, cotangent x plus 1. And I changed it to sines and cosines. You can pause this and look at what I did. And added those together. And I noticed that looks a lot like what I want here. The only thing that's missing is a cosine in this denominator and a cosine in this denominator. Well, I can take care of that problem. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this by 1, and I'm going to choose 1 to be the cosine of x over the cosine of x. So it's not bad to look at this maybe in a different form to see where you need to go if you get stuck. But your answer is only one side. This cosine now will cancel out that cosine, as this one will that. And now I have cosine of x minus sine of x over just the sine of x, just like I had on the other side. Cosine of x plus sine of x over sine of x. So now we got this monomial denominator. I'm going to break this into two fractions. Cosine x over sine x minus sine x over sine x, all over the same thing, but with a plus. And now you can see it's nicely falling into place. That's the cotangent of x minus 1 all over the cotangent of x plus 1. Alrighty, so I will be posting the solutions to the next days on Google Classroom, and I will upload another video maybe tomorrow morning or later tonight with the next lesson. Please remember, you can ask all your questions on Google Classrooms. I can give you hints there also. Have fun. Talk to you tomorrow.